Good evening. I am the epidemic and I am living in the past. I'm here to tell you today that I suffer from rage, and with my help, you can too. White Wolf's 1995 Rage card game puts you in control of a pack of guru, otherwise known as werewolves, who are out to defend Mother Earth, also known as Gaia, from the perils of the worm. Both you and your opponents will select a pack of werewolves in which to maul your way to victory. You will also create a deck of Sept cards and a deck of combat cards. So let's go ahead and take a look at each of the different major types of cards, starting with the werewolves themselves. You'll notice that they are double-sided. They'll have a picture on the front, sometimes the same picture on the back, but sometimes it's different. You will know what the front side is by the foil watermark seal on the bottom right-hand corner. So if you look at the card, you've got obviously the name at the top center. On the right of it, you have its renown level. Right under the picture, you'll have three different symbols, one indicating the tribe that particular werewolf's from, his auspice in the center, and her breed form, meaning whether or not she was born a wolf or born a human or somewhere in between. In the bottom left, you will see three important stats: rage, gnosis, and health. Rage is the measure of overall ferocity in battle. Gnosis is the spiritual attachment that this particular werewolf possesses, and health is pretty obvious. To the right of the three main stats, you may see a special ability that your particular werewolf has. Sometimes it's just flavor text, and in a few cases, if you flip the card over, you will see your particular werewolf in the battle form. The picture will be different. The stats on the left will be different, usually higher in the case of rage and health, and the special ability may also have changed. So that's all well and good, but what does it all mean? Well, let's go ahead and get started with that. If you flip back over to the front side of the card, you will see the renown was the first thing we covered. The renown is the level of fame and respect that particular werewolf has obtained to this point. The three keywords define this particular warrior. You belong to one of 13 tribes. Growl's Moon is a red talon. She was born under one of the 4 moon phases, and she is a galliard. That is the role she plays in any given pack. And she was born lupus, a wolf. These three keywords will dictate what cards that this particular werewolf can play. For example, the card True Fear, which is a gift bestowed unto the werewolf by Gaia, can only be given to an Ahrun, a Red Talon, or a Shadow Lord, but you'll notice they also must have a Gnosis of 4. Moving down to the vital stats, rage is how crazy your warrior gets during a fight. If you look through your combat cards, each of them will have a rage requirement. You must have at least that number or higher in order to play that card during a fight. Gnosis is the measurement of spiritual wisdom and bond to Gaia/Mother Earth that any particular guru is. A higher Gnosis stat will allow you to use stronger and more potent gifts. Lastly, we have health. That is the amount of damage that your particular warrior can sustain without keeling over and dying. So let's move on to your Sept cards. You will have a deck of Sept cards consisting of no less than 25 cards. There are 9 different types of Sept cards that can be found in your deck. So what exactly goes into a Sept deck? Cards that are designed to help your werewolves murder most righteously. So to briefly go over the 9 different types of sept cards, we'll go ahead and start with moot cards. Moot cards are cards that you play during the moot phase, and you use renown to determine which of your werewolves can play this particular card. Not all characters entangled in this world of darkness are werewolves. Allies are people that are known by any particular tribe and can help out in your quest for victory. Enemies are the servants of the worm and your prey in this battle. They are placed in the hunting grounds, and you and your opponents will take turns tearing them to pieces for victory points. Events are cards that you play that have an effect on not just your tribe, but the entire game. Gifts are special abilities and powers that are given to the warrior directly from Gaia, and they act very similar to equipment. Rights are cards that you can play on your pack members or other people's pack members based on their actions during the game. Action cards are cards that allow one of your pack members to do a specific thing at a specific time. Equipment are the tools that your heroes use to attain victory, whether that's through direct violence or through other means. And finally, the past life. Each tribe has the spirit of a legendary warrior watching over them, and when you have this card, they A, do not count towards your minimum of 25 cards, B, start the game attached to a specific member of your pack, and C, bestow that particular warrior with all kinds of benefits. So now that we're good and bored, let's go ahead and learn how to play. First, you will choose a renown level for the game. 20 is the average. That means you need 20 points worth of werewolves in your deck. Not 21, 20. There are a total of 5 phases in the game. The draw phase, regeneration phase, equipment and ally phase, the moot phase, and the combat phase. So the draw phase is pretty simple. You draw up to 5 cards in your hand from your sept deck. If you're on any turn other than the first, you can also discard any cards that you no longer want, and just make sure that when you end the phase, you draw up to those 5 cards. So the next phase is the regeneration phase. The regeneration phase repairs the damage that you accrue during the combat phases of all the prior turns. So basically, each character on all teams, assuming they have the ability to regenerate, which your werewolves do, your other supernatural creatures do, basic humans don't. So you may want to check to make sure, especially with your allies, because some regenerate, some don't. But in either case, you then take whichever damage card that particular character has and just pull the lowest damaging card off of it. Because as you'll see with the combat phase, as you take damage, more cards just get slapped down upon you. Be mindful, you cannot regenerate aggravated damage. That is usually delivered by a special piece of equipment that tells you that this damage card is aggravated. Just keep an eye out for that. So the next phase is the equip ally phase. Basically, all you're doing here is using the cards from your sept hand and just equipping your werewolves with stuff. You can also play allies at this time. If there are any enemy cards in your hand that you wish to put in the hunting grounds, you can go ahead and do this. There is no real turn order. This is all considered simultaneous play, so you and your opponents can all be playing these cards all at the same time. I don't believe there are any interrupts that say once this guy plays this equipment, do this. But if you happened to have found that one card that does that, alright, fine, then just follow the instructions on the card. the next phase is called the moot phase. A moot, if you don't know, is basically a meeting of the tribe. So all the werewolves gather together to basically have a sit down and discuss the matters that are important at hand. For the purposes of the game, this is when each of your werewolves, if you have moot cards in your hand, can play them. So all the players all at the same time say, this particular character of mine is playing this particular moot. Once all the moots are on the table, you then vote on them all together from the highest renown moot down to the lowest renown moot. So for example, if I was going to play the moot CAERN building, right, I have to use a character that has a renown of at least 6 to play it, and then it goes out onto the table. Once all the other moot cards have been played, since this is a renown 6 and we'll just assume it's the highest renowned card, we will go ahead and vote on it. Each player gets a total number of votes as they have surviving characters. So if this is turn 1 of the game and everybody's got 20 points worth of werewolves, everybody's got 20 votes. And so just to be clear, if there were 4 different moots that you could vote on, you get 4 sets of 20 votes, right? So each living character gets their renown points for each individual vote. So it's not like, well, I guess I'll let these first 2 go. None of my guys are going to vote because I want to save up all my votes for the final card to be played. You can feel free to vote every time on every issue. So basically, if we go back to our example, CAERN building says that you need to select a player to own the CAERN. That can be yourself. It can be an opponent. That's your call. So once the target is selected, everybody votes yay or nay. If the vote passes, meaning more people say that's fine, give him the CAERN, then you literally give them the card, and then you follow the bonuses on the card. The player gets 4 victory points if the moot passes, and for the remainder of the game, any creatures in the hunting grounds are at rage +2 when fighting members of that controlling player's pack. So to sum up the example, if I weren't going to play this card on myself, if I was going to play it on my opponent to the left, assuming it passes, yes, they do get 4 victory points, but also, anytime they want to fight one of the enemies in the hunting grounds, the enemies are +2 in rage against them. So they will be playing tougher cards, and that opponent will have a tougher time surviving the fights. Before we get to the final phase of any given turn, I do want to take a minute to show you what the play area looks like. So if you see here, the opponent, assuming this is a 2-player game, sits across from you. But if you have multiple people, just sit in a circle. You know how to figure it out. You will put your characters basically in the center of your play area. Your 2 decks can just be off to the side, but make sure that there's room for your discard pile for each set right next to it. Make sure you've got another spot also for where you put all your victory points. Those are enemies that are slain. Those are also the opposing characters that you slay, and various other cards that will give you victory points. Just make sure you've got an identifiable pile of them. And finally, the spot between all players, whether that be 2 or 5, is the hunting grounds. This is where all of the enemy cards go, or any other cards that are told to be in the hunting grounds. When you choose your alphas, which we'll get to in a minute, they will be the ones who move forward to be right next to the hunting grounds, so it's clear you know who is leading your pack in the fight for that particular turn. So let's move on to a combat deck. Combat decks are the means in which you do your damage to your enemies. So there's basically 2 kinds of combat cards: combat actions and combat events. Combat events alter the action in some fashion, and a combat action is the actual act of delivering damage. So if we look at the anatomy of a combat card, you will see at the bottom it'll tell you whether or not it's a combat action or a combat event. At the top you'll see the name of the card. You'll also see in the middle, assuming it's a combat action, its rage cost and how much damage it inflicts. Combat events are pretty straightforward. It tells you when you are supposed to play the card and what the effect is. Case in point, with Frenzy, you play the card on a character you control either before the first round of combat or between rounds of combat, and the effect is that guru immediately enters Frenzy. So if we look at an example, if you look at Spine Crushed, you must have a werewolf that is currently at Rage 9 or higher to be able to play this card. If you do successfully play the card, you deal 7 damage, and if you look at the text box, you'll see that there is a restriction with this card. You can only use it in Krynos form, meaning you have to be in your battle form specifically to be able to play this. So when you make up your combat deck of at least 20 cards, just remember you can't have more than 2 copies of any one card in that deck. So finally, we get to the murder phase. I mean, it took us forever to get to this point, but now that we're through all the bullshit, we get to see why this game is worth playing. So the first thing everybody does in a combat phase is to discard any combat cards in their hand that they don't want, and then redraw up to 5 cards immediately. Please note that if you ever run out of combat cards, just reshuffle your discard pile back into a fresh deck. Next, all players simultaneously choose which of their characters is going to be the pack alpha for this particular combat round. Everybody move your alphas to the hunting grounds all at the same time. Now, whoever's character has the highest renown gets to go first, and then you continue in order of descending renown. So these are the things that your alpha can do. You could either do something stupid, like pass, and do nothing this combat round. You can also choose to attack any of the creatures that are in the hunting grounds, or any of the opposing pack alphas who are near the hunting grounds. Lastly, you could choose to pull a Babe Ruth and challenge any other character or ally in play that is not an alpha or in the hunting grounds. The only catch to this, though, is if you challenge Joe Schmo on some other team, Joe Schmo has the right to refuse the challenge. So once your target is selected, combat begins. First, you want to check to see if there are any events or gifts that you have that can affect this combat. If it is optional that the effect occurs, then you can choose whether or not you want it to go off. Same thing with your opponent, which, by the way, if your opponent is a creature from the hunting grounds, then one of your opposing players will play their combat cards as if they were the enemy in the hunting grounds themselves. Once everybody's ready to go, each player involved in the combat will draw one of their 5 combat cards, and they will both play them at the same time. Most of the time, the card that you play will only work if you have a rage value that is equal to or greater than the rage requirement of the combat card played. So you've played the combat cards simultaneously, and now the damage affects the opponent simultaneously. It's not just the physical damage number that you have to be mindful of, but if there's a special effect on the card that reduces or increases your rage level or something else, you got to make sure that you take that into effect as well. So now that you've both dealt damage in the first round of combat, a couple of things could happen. One of the players could transform. If you ever take more damage than your rage stat, for example, if you have a rage of 2 and you take 3 damage, you will automatically shift into your battle form, Krynos form for werewolves. If any character has received more damage than their health rating, they are dead. Now please note, if it's a werewolf, they can transform if they have taken more damage than their rage stat. When you flip over like that, you may see that your werewolf now has more health than they did initially. So in those cases, once you've transformed, you still die if the damage exceeds your health stat. Once the blood and bone is sorted out, the attacker can choose if they want to begin a new combat round. If the attacker does not choose to run away at this point, then both players will play another combat card from their hand, and then another, until one of a few things ends combat. So combat ends when either one side is dead, one side is successfully escaped, or the attacker runs out of combat cards. If the defender runs out of combat cards, life sucks. So when that combat finally ends, all players involved draw back up to 5 combat cards, reshuffling if necessary. Slain foes become victory points for the victor. Once everybody has finished up with all of the available combat, the official turn ends, and you recycle back to the draw phase. So if you thought combat was simple enough, let's go ahead and complicate that for you. There are 2 additional rules that need to be taken into account when you play this game. The first is frenzy, and the second one is bluff. Whenever you play a card or have the ability to make your character frenzy, this is what happens. If you're not already in battle form, immediately switch to it. Additionally, set whatever combat cards you currently have in your combat hand aside and start a second combat hand. That is populated with the same amount of rage your battle form character has. Frenzied characters can choose to play any of the cards in their frenzy hand or their combat hand. The attacker cannot choose to automatically withdraw at the end of a combat phase. They must play an escape card. Same thing if you're the defender. Additionally, your frenzied character is so out of control right now, even if it receives lethal damage, it doesn't die until combat ends. So you might be a smaller werewolf, you might be finally killed off, but if you went into frenzy before that, you might be able to play enough cards to take down your murderer. When a frenzied combat does finally end, if there are any remaining cards that were drawn for the frenzy specifically, you throw them in the discard pile. They'll get reshuffled back in whenever you run out of combat cards again. So earlier I said that you cannot play combat cards if your character's rage does not at least equal or exceed the rage requirement of the card. Well, I lied. You can, and in the cases where you play a card that you shouldn't be able to successfully play, that is known as a bluff. You do this for combat only. If you only have a rage of 1, for example, you can technically play a rage 10 card. The only way a bluff succeeds, though, is through one of 2 mechanisms. The only way Growls at Moon is going to successfully ENTRAIL REND is if either A, her opponent also bluffs, or B, her opponent either chose not to or could not play a card. Finally, before finishing up, I do want to address the Umbra. The Umbra is the spirit realm. Certain cards allow certain characters to go there. If you happen to be in the Umbra by way of playing any number of cards or conditions, you can interact with any other characters or creatures that are in the Umbra with you. So if you're ever there, put just a little token on that particular character. That way everybody can tell if one of those characters is in the normal realm or in the spirit realm. Somebody in the spirit realm can only fight somebody that is in the spirit realm, and somebody in the real world can only fight somebody that is in the real world. Just keep that in mind. Otherwise, we've covered everything we need in order to get a couple of games of Rage on the table. So thank you for watching. I do hope that you enjoyed this tutorial for Rage the Apocalypse. It's kind of pointless considering the game went belly up 20 years ago, but for the few people that do enjoy this game, I hope it is either enlightening or at least humorous, and thank you for taking the time to take a look at it. And finally, for anybody who is attending my Living in the Past Rage Sealed Draft, price of admission is watching this video so that you know how to play before we actually start playing. That way we don't waste everybody's time trying to teach everybody how to play. The password to prove that you sat through this boring video is curb stomp. When you get to the nerd store, make sure you tell me that the password is curb stomp. That way you can get in and play in our free Living in the Past Rage Sealed Draft event.